Simply put, it's about creating a National Poetry Library of Wales. We don't have one, which, considering that our anthem literally says we are a country of beirdd a chantorion, poets and singers, is odd and yet to be finished in all the ways, I think. Some might argue that, perhaps we don't need one because we're such a poetic and musical nation. But I would argue that one of the best ways to continue that spirit is to give it a home that can ensure its future. So the campaign really, in its first section here, has been to raise political awareness and political will, as we're in the Senedd talking to politicians tonight. And then once we have that, and once we have essentially agreement across the sort of political spectrum, then when we've got the political spectrum stuffs, once we've got the political spectrum stuffs across it, all of it, I think, then we should be good. And that's where the campaign's at today and where we're celebrating and bringing politicians in tonight. Helo, noswaith dda. Noswaith dda, cyfeillion. Diolch i chi gyd. Diolch am ddod, am rando, a siarad ac ofed, dwi'n gobeithio, efo ni. In preparing for this event, I asked myself if I could get a celebrity speaker, or even better, to give us a message. Who would it be, I thought? Maybe Menna Elfyn, if you know your poets. Well, she supports the campaign, but she is in London with her rather famous daughter, Ellen Fleer. Gwyneth Thomas, who wrote the words on the Millennium Centre, just across the way. Gwyneth Lewis? Sorry. It is Gwyneth Lewis, isn't it? I literally had her email just today and I was too busy to get it right, clearly. Well, she supports the campaign. And she even met the Minister, Dawn Bowden, with me. But she is in Oxford teaching. Michael Sheen, perhaps. He's already supported us on Twitter and internationally, but he is actually an international superstar. Just today I thought, I know, Mick Lynch, RMT union leader, but he can't be that busy, can he? Well, seeing as he is, I thought I'd start the event with a quote from his political hero, James Connolly. James Connolly said, "No revolutionary movement is complete without its poetical expression." And I'd add that devolution is incomplete without a national poetry library. So tonight I'd like to discuss the why and the how of a national poetry library. To do that, we will need political will across the spectrum, but to help us with that, of course, is Heledd Fychan, who has kindly supported this event. So I'd like to thank her first and invite her up to speak.
Diolch yn fawr iawn a croeso i chi gyd a croeso i fy nghyd aelodau o'r Senedd hefyd. A mae'n bleser o mwyaf cael deud gair o groeso a chefnogaeth yr ymgyrch hon i greu llyfrgell barddoniaeth i Gymru. Wedi'r cyfan yn un genedl sy'n enwog am fod yn wlad beirdd a chantorion, mi fysach chi'n meddwl bod o'n scandal bod ganddo ni ddim llyfrgell o'r fath. I should say it's such a pleasure to have you here this evening, and I'm proud to be able to state my support for this project. It's an important national project, and we may ask, why don't we already have one? After all, other nations have one, and we have a long and proud tradition of poetry that is intertwined with our sense of identity. Indeed, my own name, Heledd, stems from a poem, Canu Heledd, which is a very depressing saga. If you know anything about it, people usually ask me, "Oh, Heledd, is it the same as Helen?" And I go, no. It's a very depressing story of a princess that was lamenting the death and destruction of her home and family. At the hands of the English as well. So perhaps it's no wonder that I'm here in the Senedd today representing Plaid Cymru. But when we think about the history of Wales, so much of what we know about our history comes through our poetry, our sense of identity, our sense of belonging, our sense of questioning as well. So much of that is reflected in our poetry. And in one sense, it may be strange to some people that at a time of a cost of living crisis, that we're discussing something that can seem quite elitist. You know, poetry can seem at times something that is perceived as something for those that have privilege. And there are real and perceived barriers. But I think the strength when we've seen other poetry, national poetry libraries, and looking at the Scottish example, which has the motto of bringing people and poems together, and that sense that other national libraries have about smashing those stereotypes, of tackling things that, like low literacy, of making sure that we ensure greater representation in poetry. All of that is possible. But at a time when so many people are questioning their existence, you know, going through a pandemic, all of us have been asking questions and reflecting, and also questioning things. You know, we've seen campaigns about establishing this place, that sense of what is Wales, where are we going as a nation, discussions now about the expansion of the Senedd. Both poetry and politics are so intertwined, and I think we need to have that creative space. And I think one of the ways that we will get through recovering from a pandemic, rebuilding our nation, is providing that space for creativity, ensuring that everybody has equity of access to that creativity. And I think we have the opportunity to create something exciting here in Wales, something that isn't trying to emulate or copy the other national poetry libraries, but is unique and is ingrained, because after all, poetry and Wales go intertwined, as does our history, and I know it will to the future. So I'm very excited to hear more about this evening. A diolch yn fawr iawn, Ben, and the holl waith caled ar hyn. Thank you so much for all your hard work on this. You certainly convinced me in that first pitch, so hopefully we can convince others tonight. Felly diolch o galon I chi gyd. Thank you so much.
Diolch boys at the back as well. Yes, so I'm going to run you through essentially the how and the why, like I said, but that accessibility that Heledd just mentioned is so important. So let us see if we can essentially get to the why not as well. If England has, by some measures, two, but actually if you include the Oxford Library, if you include the Morpeth Northern Library and the upcoming Liverpool Library, you could expand that to 4. Others argue England might actually already have 6 or 7 poetry libraries. We, of course, have none. Scotland has one, and the Republic is, through the Seamus Heaney Centre, building their own as well. But it's more than that. It's not just, oh, they've got it, so we should have it. It's that it's an integral part of what Wales is. Like Heledd said, Wlad Beirdd a Chantorion. And with poetry, you get empathy, you get understanding, you get knowledge, you get history. My own name, Gwalchmai, he was a poet. Approximately 800 years ago, I understand, possibly older. But that isn't just our names, it's more than that. It's what becomes of a country if it doesn't have the institutions to protect that poetry and to grow that poetry. So, I want to take a quick look at some case studies. But before that, we have a message from Iestyn Tyne, prize-winning poet from the north. For those of you that don't speak Welsh, you will need translator headphones. And for those of you that don't speak very northern accented Welsh, you may also need headphones.
Iestyn Tyne sy'n yma, ni'n cefnogi amgylch llyfrgell Magnolia Tree. Mae sefyllfa bach yn bodoli eisoes mewn bywyd eraill, ac yn oda llwyddiannus goffa sydd yn cynnig nolfa i ddarllenwyr farddoniaeth, i sgwenwyr farddoniaeth, ac i'r farddoniaeth un, wrth gwrs. Dwi'n meddwl bod o'n cynnig cyfle i fynd a sefydliad o'r fath i ardal ddaearyddol o Gymru sydd allan yn disgwyl lle bydd nhw'n cael effaith cadarnhaol ar y gymuned o gwmpas. Mae hynny'n beth cyffroes iawn i fi, i gymeddwl llawn y llefydd canolog yna wedyn. Dwi'n meddwl hefyd, cryfderau y sîn arfol yn Cymru, mae gen i hefyd sîn arfol sydd yn gallu bod yn banedig ac yn ynysig, a beirdd Cymraeg, a beirdd Eiddo Gymreig, a beirdd Cag, a beirdd Rhydd. Mae dod â cyfan at ei gilydd o dan un tôn yn saffod yn lle cadarnhaol iawn. Felly, o hwyl i'r ymgyrch dwi'n eich ymlaen yn ymwneud i weld beth yna'n datblygu.
Diolch, Estyn. But yes, as we can see, we have a couple of case studies. The Scottish Poetry Library was essentially started in a room with a few books. It was an idea, but from great acorns, as we know, oak trees grow. And now, today, it employs, I think it's 9 people and 30,000 books. From basically 300, as it started, 300 books, which wouldn't really fill a wall, to the national, international, huge institution that it is today. They also give out poetry collections to every single graduate doctor in Scotland. Every single doctor that goes into their NHS gets a book of poetry. That alone is a way for the poets and the doctors to connect doctors to understand the wider effects of their work. And that is a fantastic health, mental health, and even economic benefit of their poetry library. The Manchester Poetry Library, which if anyone at Manchester hears this, I should say thank you to Manchester Metropolitan, who are kindly supporting tonight, and that is a part of their university, the Manchester Poetry Library, born in the pandemic, proving that things can happen even in adversity, but also that Manchester, through its UNESCO City of Literature status, was able to leverage so much of that to get stuff done. And it is a fantastic building. If you get the opportunity to go to Manchester, I can thoroughly recommend it. There are more. How and with who? Before we get on to the how and with who, I do want to add that there are accessibility benefits to poetry and poetry libraries and having a lending library, a national lending library, because though the Aberystwyth brilliant National Library is an institution and a half, it is not yet a lending library, as I would like our poetry library to be. Digital, online and off, and for all the people of Wales. So, how and with who? How is taking these next steps. So I'd like a poetry librarian at the National Library, and we've talked a little with stakeholders that want to see that as well. We're talking about a kind of finding the building, stacking the shelves phase, and that's really literally about working with publishers, one of whom we'll hear from tonight, about how we go about kind of really getting that poetry library as full and as ready for everyone as is possible. And then there are a lot and lot of stages, team building, working out the best place, but, well, that's up to not just me, but politicians like some of you here as well, and obviously our stakeholders, but we really would love to launch in 2025, and Dr. Becky Swain, who's working with the campaign from the Manchester Poetry Library, says that it is possible in just 3 years. We will see, fingers crossed. After that, we'd love to essentially expand and go international. Because obviously with a poetry library comes a reputation to increase, to grow, and hopefully become an international poetry connected institution. But where? I suspect politicians in the room will have different opinions. As someone from Powys, you're all wrong. It should be in Powys. We will see. And that is not up to the campaign. The campaign is, importantly, and here's where I need to add that it is about bringing political will together, cross-party, with you all, and for all of Wales.
Hi everybody. Thank you for asking me tonight. This is a really exciting campaign. I want to start with a piece called The Land Would Disappear. And I'm not really going to explain it, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. On the drive to school, a no conversation before coffee kind of day, my son asks, "Why do I have to learn Welsh?" I look out of the window to see trees telling us it's autumn, a bending back of green, as crisp and curled as the fiver Nan slips into my hand with an extra squeeze. Hands are how we say I love you, isn't it? Like when my husband strums downwards from my neck, his rich dark fingers read my landscape like braille and I cuddle closer. But so often his gentle colour spells P-R-O-B-L-E-M. And everywhere I look, words begin to bite and break and change, choking the S-A-F-E out of mouths, praying face downwards on the pavement. Trigger warnings are starting to sound like amulets, but while chanting, I keep a pebble under my tongue because some words are not meant for me or you. I heard that the Welsh mai cannot be felt in English. An ahlan wa sahlan conundrum leaving us clues in vapour and breath on the window. Maybe it says, "This is our homeland and you are welcome here." I once watched an interpreter sign a poem in BSL, her arms arched, fingers glittering gorgeous through a stanza like leaves, whispering joy into the ears of passers-by. But when a deaf friend lost a beloved, his fingers were still as a willow, frustrated that they failed to capture the grief. "I see now," says my son, as we witness the world from our car. The land would disappear. Thank you. So, as you can probably tell from the way I look, I'm a Taurus. And Tauruses are famously, we have this kind of deep connection with trees and nature and this kind of thing. And I'm a big fan of Louise Bogan, who's a poet. And there's this line from her poem, Women have no wilderness in them. And she goes on to actually say the complete opposite, that we're full of wilderness. So this is for Louise Bogan. It's called Anwar Trees. We are women of wilderness, finding power in cup and pen. Remember the tearful songs of your mother, your grandmother, and join me. We will sit together in obnoxious splendor. Listen as our backs break. Wear your whalebone scars and hoist the burden high above your head. Whisper a prayer for our sisters, tongues torn out. Ones that stitch love into collars. Ones gifted with hell for healing. Ones waiting in a basement or at a border. One's crimed, one's melancholied, one's maimed. Don't forget the woven sisters, self-made and scooped free. Men reject the worn-out worries. Be craft, be consequence, they say. But that is a thing unnatural. And we are trees, tall but bending. An unspoken sisterhood of bracken and broken bone. We invite you. See our saucepan of soup or spell, lick the ladle clean, since you mistake our gift as giving, and we will give the poison, the purpose, the peace. So, I think everyone's been kind of shocked, doesn't feel like the right word, at the latest developments from America. And so I've kind of written my own response, and it's called The Newer Colossus, since the poem that is at the base of the Statue of Liberty is called The New Colossus. And it's after Nawal Saadawi, who was a women's rights activist who passed away last year. The girl in orange is burning bright. I guess she's about 19. I hear her speak, her mouth joyfully spilling out the signature curved R's of French. There's truth in her laughter. Sparks glitter from her hands and hips, moving in time to music. She's dancing with the sun, arms high. There's truth in her girl-shaped gift of bursting light. Is she strong enough to stop the world from squashing her savage brightness? If you look closely at her glowing eyes and shimmering smile, you will see the world as dangerous as it is gorgeously yearning to breathe free. Thank you. My last one, and it has no title because it feels more like a chant, but here we go. First I took Llan for church and felt ironwork doors bolt closed on my Muslim face. No, said a friend, Llan is from Llanech, an open glade, a space to gather. So now I see Mecca in Senedd and Llandaf. I see crowds circling stumps for remnant memories, thumping feet, heavy as a pastun making qalqala on Welsh soil so loud it splits victim from terrorist, Eryri from Snowdonia. The shaking wakes the earth's power, shoots burst upward, complex tendrils rising, reaching. They unpick the sticky white webs and their sticky white lies. Let them scatter about, lost and alone. We are building from the ground up, seeking specifics amidst the messy cyclical dance. Not whole, not harmony, but hub. That seedling of love soundly lives, building worlds in our words. Say we gathered at the Llanech, making tawaf like the bees dance. Would our ancestors be proud? Thank you.
Thank you. It's been really lovely to hear such beautiful poetry this evening, and really thanks very much to Ben for inviting me up to show my support for the National Poetry Library. Poetry is always one of the main things that influence me when I'm writing songs, and I'm going to start off with an old song called O Bard, which is inspired by Philip Larkin's poem of the same name. Just remember that it's in a different tuning, it's a capo. One last time in the darkness, let's lie still as the night, unhold the shrouds that cloud the growing light. Morning holds out a finger, pain is born to the sky. Awake that takes the slumber from our eyes. Down by the stream through the veil of deception. There's one stubborn truth, the one to which we must travel to. Down by the stream there's a maiden. See how she sheds her leaves. I wait for to capture and inform, wash away to see. Thank you very much. One of the major influences on me is actually Hen Benillion, old verses from Welsh folk tradition, and many Welsh folk songs follow this sort of Hen Benillion meter, and so I often write songs in this meter, but it's kind of like it's kind of an ordinary person's meter. It's not as complicated as the sort of the Welsh King Haned and all this kind of stuff. But that's what I like about reading these old poems from the 18th and 19th century, is that you get sort of these beautiful verses written by farm hands and written by people who are living very ordinary working lives. And so this is one such song. This is called Marthair and Glassine, which is all about springtime. And the first two verses are very sort of poetic descriptions of the spring. And the last verse has a message about how the riches of the earth are plentiful, and if only mankind could learn to share in those riches, then we would all be able to enjoy them.
Glassine,
Thank you all very much. Let's proceedings proceed.
This is the first. The handkerchief tree. I stumble upon it, walking, physically distanced from groups of 2x2 air seekers. Some are masked, gloved hand in gloved hand, on government-sanctioned daily outings. I desire line off the main path, boots stomping the green between river and public. This lone dogwood's branches are fresh, blooming, large white bracts waving a truce. In Cardiff's camellia gardens, they hang small heads like sacrificed virgins, or doves, breeze disturbed, uncertain of finding peace. Most will not see them. These faux flowers won't last the frost. Others call it the ghost tree, laundry strung outside in gothic dreams, a warning of something sinister underfoot. I bear yet cannot bear witness to it. I circle thoughts, pacing around and around the trunk, wondering which name applies to it today in rare May bloom. In the arrest of this brief flutter, what message does it have? What slogan to take away? Peace, a Thelian misunderstanding, or surrender? These dove-posted letters ask me to take notice. Everyone got married. He was a cupped hand to the cigarettes she'd quit but taken up again, only to burn the time they spent like candles. She cast lines and nets, caught wishes, the glint of beaked mackerel, the silver lining to a flesh-pecked bone. Beyond their boat, stars were strung across the late sky. Bauble-eyed, they tried to drop anchor. It's quite blustery outside today, so I thought I'd do this one. I've been wanting to write to you about the trampolines, but somehow I keep getting distracted by thoughts of the flood, the way the trees in Butte Park were like bathers waving or drowning, bare arms in high winds, how the walking dogs were confused at the new pond extensions, their now swamped paths. I've been wanting to write to ask if you'd seen them, airborne, bouncing as far as we'd once dreamt we could. Remember? When we practiced and practiced, sometimes for so long and so high and laughing so much, we wet ourselves just a little, but never said. All that mattered then was the height, the leap away from land, from everything, and so, when I saw the wrecked ground as the waters ebbed, though I felt the devastation of those flooded homes, of everything lost, my first thought was how I wished I could reach you, to tell you about those flyaway trampolines, stopping trains in their tracks, causing the chaos we'd wanted, stopping the world so that we could show off our balance, our sailing grace, our flight.
I was writing this poem about the increasing risk of flooding and looking at the kind of maps of Wales that I'm sure you've all seen from Natural Resources Wales, of the areas of Wales that are going to be at risk from flooding, and you know what a gravity and a warning this kind of is to all of us. And this kind of coincided with a trip that I took to Aberdeen, which is where my great-grandmother is from. And when I was there, I went with my mum, my nan and my great-aunties, and we had the kind of time and space to trace her footsteps. I saw where she grew up. I went to the graveyard where some of her family members were buried. And while I was there, I just felt this kind of like sinking, like devastation, that what a shame it would be if my future grandchildren, great-grandchildren would not be able to retrace my steps in this way because of the risk of rising sea levels. So it's called My Magnolia Tree. All I have left of my great-grandmother is her letters. While I was taking my first breath, she was watching the storm roll in, lining the house with an army of sandbags, willing the river to shush. It had given warning in the bloat of it, with plastic bags and Stella cans thrown up onto the grass. I know this because my grandmother never had secrets. She began writing me letters long before I existed so that I might grow into something good, something brave. I know all of her firsts. First school with the haunted bell tower and the boys that cornered her in the playground. First pet, a tan Labrador that uprooted the floor tiles when left alone. First fear of being swallowed by the moon. First home, council estate. A magnolia tree that shed petals of pink snow in spring. Her first kiss between the rocks at the water's edge. Incoming tide snaking up her legs. There are lessons here. I dream of Cardiff, where I chase my grandmother's outline through the back streets, seek fingerprints on shop windows, a flash of her on the top deck of a bus. Sometimes I find her on the green of Butte Park picking wild garlic, sheltering from a shower at Central Station or clasping a blue bag of fruit on City Road. She tells me nothing was an accident. The leaders, the people, they rolled over like spent dogs, yawned above the warnings. All my great-grandmother wanted was to die an honest woman on honest land. I will never relive her firsts. Never see the garden where she planted magnolia so that I too could hold pink petals of snow. Her underwater city is a skeleton, a shipwreck, but still I ache for it. I read her letters to the sky while the storm rolls in. I line the house with an army of sandbags. Deal. So last year I became an auntie for the first time, and I wanted to write a poem about hope, which is not usually the kind of thing that I'd write a poem about, because when he was born I just felt like I was re-seeing the world in this whole way of excitement, of all the things that I couldn't wait to show him. So I called this one, My Nephew Teaches Me Hope. Miles away, he is changing daily. His darkening lashes, curls unfurling, teeth teasing gums. At the beach, I think of how I'll show him sand, the kind that's wet, hardened, best for moulding forts and castles. I'll watch him marvel at a ripe sunset or the underground map of roots exposed by a fallen tree. We'll learn to spot magpies from blackbirds from starlings, rescue drowsy bees with sugar water. I'll answer his endless questions as we're sat on the wall of the old harbour, legs swinging, tide lapping, his curious wonder for a world I forgot I'd known. Yeah. So I wrote this next one as part of my residency, which feels really relevant to read today. I wrote this in support of universal basic income, and it's called Reconsidering Future. Let's rewrite the story. In this version, your mother doesn't take a second job. No 50-hour week and empty seats at the table. Without the weight of night shifts on her back, she goes to college, starts to dream of soil-stained hands, a community garden, of reading stories to the sleepy rhythm of your breath. Your next-door neighbour lives. His body lighter, he starts to paint, fills the walls with hues of watercolour. The haunting eviction and red-lettered final warnings never come through the letterbox. His children know only how to be children, full-bellied, planning a trip to space to build a secret den in the treetops. What kind of home is Wales when a third of young people are living in poverty? Let's change the narrative, break the cycle while our toes are curled at the brink. Reverse queues for food banks, end job insecurity, rising unemployment, homelessness, the long wait for welfare checks that barely make ends meet. We may fail and stumble, but imagine a country where everyone is paid enough to truly live. Without the fear of losing it all, what would you become? Freedom to imagine, experiment, move with purpose, defined by more than a job title, possessions, productivity. When we own our bodies, I want you to just lay here in the grass and breathe. Yeah. So I'm going to finish with a poem called Sabrina, which was inspired by Sabrina, the goddess of the River Severn. I read that she saw herself as a protector of women, and I just kind of took that idea and ran with it. So it's called Sabrina. Imagine a river. When the swan dips its head to dive and drink, you'll find me. Hair of knotted weeds, body sculpted into the mud flats. The river feeds into the wetlands where fishermen gather and drink lager. Haul salmon to their arms for photographs, hooded against the sunrise. You'll find hooks protruding from the pores of your skin. When the body of a woman is devoured, cut open, spat back onto the bank, we'll run the river red and roll her out clean. Bed of kelp, salt on skin, her husband, blood on the cap of his boots. Diolch,
Thank you, Taylor. That was fantastic. So, had the voting not been delayed, we would now have a Q&A session, but the voting was delayed. And as such, I'm just going to put these questions to you for consideration, because it's not going to be a panel. We don't have time. We have to literally leave the Senedd in a short while. 5 or 10 minutes, just under 10 minutes. So the questions I would have asked all of our wonderful poets and our singer would have been, how can poets and singers help in communities? How would you use a poetry library, one that's accessible, online, lending, nearby, archives? I'd like to see history made in the poetry library with residencies. Would you like one? Which I suspect most poets and singers would be like, yes, very much, please. How would publishers react? Susie's not just a poet, she's a brilliant representative of Parthian publishing and an editor there, so I would love to know about that, and I hope you will ask at some point in the future. How did your library usage change in the pandemic, and what does that mean we might learn about the future of libraries? And how can we forge better connections across the world to leave those messages of hope and hope for the future that Taylor mentioned? But I just need to say thank you very much to all. Thank you to our performers, thank you to the Senedd, thank you to Heledd again, and all the politicians that have spoken to and supported and promoted the campaign, and obviously everyone who came. Diolch, and we have about 5 minutes to grab an extra drink, so please do. Diolch yn fawr iawn.